Books have always been an integral part of my life. I've been an avid reader since, early childhood. I have spoken before about travels with my family and how I always pack two bags, one with the items deemed necessary, like clothes and a toothbrush, and the second, and much, much more important to me, a bag full of books from the library. My siblings used to groan that I got to take two bags and they only got to have one. I remember one summer when we were all sitting in the back of our station wagon and each kid was in each corner. I have three siblings. And I had to sit on top of the bag of books since it was the only way I was allowed to take it with me. Thankfully, my father, also an avid reader, somehow figured out how to include this treasure trove in all our summer travels, despite the complaints from the rest of my family and definitely space limitations. Many adults I know have strong memories of a book or books read during their childhood that were deeply moving. To this day, if I'm in a bookstore, I'll start in the kids or teen section to see if my favorite books are still popular or in print, while also reminiscing over the books my now adult children cherished when they were young and we read them together. Telling stories are the way in which we can teach, share, and inspire. And whether real or imagined, we can use the written word to explore what might be familiar or new, personal or global, embraced or even rejected. Stories are deeply impactful and can affect change in ourselves and in the world around us. Do you have a book that changed the way you think? Do you have an author who seems to just know your inner thoughts and speak out loud about them, especially when you remain silent? I hope that for all of you who are listening, that there is a book or two that speaks to you in a deep or special way. One that brings clarity and healing, pleasure and insight. Keep that book close. And if you haven't found one yet, keep looking because I'm sure it's just waiting to be revealed to you. Welcome to GynoCurious. I am your host, Dr. Amy Novatt. From both sides of the speculum, we're here to investigate what it means to be healed and to be a healer. Please share the show with your friends. And if you have questions or concerns, please write to comments at radiofreerhinecliffe.org. Let us know your thoughts. Today, I am welcoming Rachelle Bergstein. Rachelle is a New York-based lifestyle writer, best-selling author, and editor, focused on style, pop culture, and families. Her work has appeared in the New York Post, the New York Times, NPR, and more. She is the author of three books, Women from the Ankle Down, Brilliance and Fire, and in 2024, she published The Genius of Judy, How Judy Blum Rewrote Childhood for All of Us. She lives with her husband and son in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Rachelle. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So as I mentioned, I've always been an avid reader. Would you say you've always been a writer?
Yes, I would. I loved your story about packing an extra suitcase full of books because I feel like parents love readers, right? Readers are quiet. Readers know how to entertain themselves. But yes, I've been a writer for as long as I can remember. I loved books. I loved to read. And I think, I grew up in the 80s back when you asked kids frequently what they wanted to be when they grew up. So as long as I can remember, I told people I wanted to be a writer. The goal aged with me. So when I was really little, I wanted to be the author of children's books. And when I was an adult, I wanted to write for adults. But yeah, the desire to write was always there.
Great. So for me, writing for the public feels like really an act of bravery. If I have to write something and it has to go out to the public, I feel so vulnerable. It's not something I feel terribly confident in. But as an experienced writer, do you see your work as an act of courage? Do you get totally confident that you're a great writer, even though you've written three books or not? Like, does
You
that
know,
happen?
I have days where I feel really great about my writing. I have
Uh-huh.
pieces that I feel really good about. But no, there's a lot of insecurity, I think, in being any kind of artist who puts things out into the world. And, you know, I've gotten better about it, but I do feel vulnerable when new things go out there. And when I was in college, I used to watch Conan O'Brien. He had the Late Late Show. And he did this sketch at like 2 o'clock in the morning that was called Nobody's Watching. And he would do this really zany stuff. And he'd be like, it's great because nobody's watching. And I have to tell myself when I'm writing that nobody's watching, right? Nobody's ever going to read this. This is just for fun. This is just something that I like to do with my time. So there's a bit of a mental game to it.
I like that. I'm gonna use that because I'm like getting into the world of reels for the show, and I must tell you, it is so daunting. Everything from how do I hold this darn camera to don't look so serious. Should I put on makeup? It's just so not me, but it's a part of joining the world. So I will remember that. No one's really watching.
Nobody's watching. It's so liberating.
And I asked the question because, so many of us, but particularly vulva havers, feel like we're not really true to who we are because the world has never really seen us, or we're an imposter, or we're not good enough. So, here I'm talking to a person who has written 3 books out there. And, yet still there's a sense of, I've got to still work at this. I've still got to, build up the confidence. And that's normal. That's human.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that we are our own harshest critics, right? So it's always a bit of an uphill climb to keep putting stuff out there, to keep believing it's okay, even when the comments are mean, even when the good reviews are mean, to just try to drown out the noise.
Yeah. So your books are all nonfiction. How did that
Mhm.
become your genre?
I thought I wanted to be a fiction writer. I really did. And I think a lot of nonfiction writers start there where they dream of writing a novel or something. But for me, telling stories that actually happened feels really satisfying. And I find it really joyful to go through archives, to talk to people about things that they're expert in, and then translate that for readers. That's something that I just feel like I have a knack for and I feel is really satisfying. I also like the parameters of it. As I've gotten to just know more about myself, I've realized that fiction is kind of overwhelming to me because it could be anything, right? You have a blank page, you could create any character in any world and anything could happen to them. And while that's creatively exciting, it's also really daunting. So I think for me, having some guardrails of like, no, it has to be as close as possible to what happened, or you have to, represent the beliefs of real people out there. It gives me something to anchor to.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Which brings me to, there are so many kind of terrific books out there, particularly for children and young adults that were written in the 70s. Why did you choose to write about Judy Blum?
So I personally love Judy Blum. Some of her books have really meant so much to me from a very young age. I write about in the introduction to my book, I write about how her book, Just as Long as We're Together, was the first book that I read that I asked my dad to stop reading to me before bed. So he read to me every night that I was at his house. My parents were divorced. And that book I wanted to read and I didn't want to put it down. So I was willing to like let go of this beautiful childhood ritual in order to keep finding out what was happening to these girls. You know, Judy Bloom's world that she created on the page is a world of it's it's like for adolescent girls. It's like a portal when you're a young person into what your adolescent and teenage years might look like, what kind of things you might be thinking, what kind of things you're already thinking, but you didn't even recognize it. So that's a really long way of saying that I personally feel connected to Judy Bloom's work. And then I also noticed that every time you say the name Judy Bloom to any woman of a, certain generation, they get almost like misty. They get emotional. It's like they're recalling an old high school boyfriend or something. It's like it's not she's not just any writer. And you're right that so many people were writing terrific books for adolescents and teenagers in the 70s and 80s. But there's something about Judy Bloom that just it gets us in the heart, right? Even as adults, we look back and we're like, oh, these books were so special.
She has a way of writing that makes you think, or I should say, it made me think she was talking about me. It was about me. It was
Yes.
so, it was so personal and honest and, talking about these universalities, but through an individual character's voice that just tapped right into my soul. Yeah, she's just brilliant. Yeah.
And that's your special sauce. I think you just nailed it. The universalities brought down to this super relatable one character, usually one girl who's 11, 12, 13. Her body's changing, her life is changing, her perspective is changing. And yet she's so relatable, and things that she's going through are so typical. And yeah, kids just couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah, it really is a gift. It's really remarkable. Yeah. I've spoken to several experts on the field of sex ed, which has always been a contentious issue in this country in particular. And in some schools, they've completely eradicated sex ed. And certainly writing about masturbation and menstruation, as Judy did, can be so divisive and provocative. I even know pediatricians and gynecologists who can talk to their patients about self pleasure. So these are folks who are supposed to know how to use this language. Can you talk about how fiction can be used to explore and educate issues like this kind of for all of us?
Yeah. I mean, I spoke to sex ed experts as well who said, in no uncertain terms, Judy Blum is sex ed. She's not what we think of conventionally as sex education, but she is. And how many young people learned about masturbation, about menstruation, about virginity through her books, right? And there's something very safe about learning about these things in fiction. It's depersonalized. It's about an imaginary character in an imaginary world. And so, you know, you just let the information wash over you, but it's in the confines of a story and it's not embarrassing in the way being in a classroom with your peers and seeing a teacher talk about these things is embarrassing. If you see something in a book that you need clarification or about or you want to talk about, it's a really easy way to bring it up with your parents, to say, Catherine in Forever had this question, or Catherine in Forever was going through this. That's a lot easier for a child to say than So I think that we cannot underestimate the value of talking about these serious body topics in books in a way that kids can sort of digest them on their own terms.
So, in preparation for our talk today, I read again, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And I noticed a lot of things. One, of course, was I read it in about an hour, which is great because I think it probably took me much longer when I was a kid.
Yes.
But what Judy does so brilliantly is she takes, these four girls who are all experiencing different way of accepting, not accepting, telling the truth, not telling the truth about their menstrual cycle. So it's kind of like she's representing everyone. And I don't think I realized that as a teenager, other than I probably identified with Margaret to some degree. And then the subtleties of the party with spin the bottle and the honesty that Margaret admits to of like, I don't know what that is. Who's that? What's that? It's just, again, you're right. It was such a gentle, honest, articulate way of talking about subjects that adolescents often don't have words for. So if somebody else can say it out loud for them, oh, what a wonderful way to map it out, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think people necessarily realize what a quiet pioneer Judy Blum was for writing about these things, right? Now, children and teens have access to such a diverse number of books and stories, and YA books tend to be quite explicit in some cases. But back when Judy was writing, that really wasn't the case. She was just writing down what she knew from being a teenager and a young adolescent, and no one told her not to. Right. And it was just one of those things where she did it. And I don't think that she realized how brave she was being until after the fact when her book started getting challenged.
Yeah. Talk about courage and bravery. It's really impressive. So, we're certainly at a time where bodily autonomy and the freedom of choice around medical decisions, particularly for vulva havers, are being denied more and more. When you decided to write about Bloom's work, was this in a response to the changing kind of tides of our sociopolitical world, or was it just timely?
It was a mixture of both. So I had already decided that I wanted to pursue an idea about Judy Blum. And the idea was always kind of a hybrid genre, biography and cultural history. So it was all in the mix. And, Trump had been president before. But it was when Roe v. Wade was overturned and I was working on my book proposal that I was like, I really think this is the right moment for this book. I really think we need someone like Judy Blum to look up to because our bodily autonomy, as you said, is being infringed upon in real time. So I felt very empowered to write this book, knowing that we need her more than ever. We need people like her out there. We need to celebrate them and we need to learn from them because we're back in a very conservative and challenging moment for women.
Yeah, which is exactly why I invited you to speak with me today. That the work that you've kind of unpacked and brought to a focus is so relevant on so many levels, from a feminist point of view, from a bodily autonomy point of view, from teaching our children about their bodies, being healthy, being afraid, and yet learning. I mean, all the things that come through in her work and now in yours. So thank you for that. Really, it's
Oh,
so
thank you for
important.
saying that.
Yeah. And we're speaking to each other in March. The show may drop in April, but I just wanted to point out it's, International Women's Month. So it is important that we talk to each other. But am I just being sexist? When I look at your list of books, it feels like they are definitely about and for women. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I invite any man to read my books. No exclusion. There's no clubhouse. But yeah, I do write gearing towards women. I write with women in mind, and I think it's just because these subjects are really interesting to me. And I like to give voice to things that stereotypically have been considered women's fascinations and women's subjects. So I wrote my first book about shoes. And to me, shoes were telling a story that was really subtle, but it was really important. And at that same time, they were being dismissed as a girly thing, a frivolous thing that women were obsessed with, and God knows why. And I wanted to pause and say, maybe there's a reason that this has happened. Maybe there's a reason that women care so much about what their shoes they put on their feet.
Yeah, yeah. And then the second book was about diamonds, correct?
It was, and it was a similar thing. It was like, women tend to be the ones who are excited to receive diamonds, who are excited to wear and talk about diamonds. And I started researching that and learned all about the advertising campaign that De Beers started in 1947 to make the engagement ring ritual a thing. And once I learned about that and the characters who were involved in it, it was very Mad Men. I was really hooked on that story.
So I want to pivot a little bit, please. I want to talk about censorship and banning of books. And again, as I was thinking about what we talk about today, and I was thinking about the environment in which gynecologists are working in today and all the legislation that's happening across the country, I started reading and I want to share this with you. So, book banning is nothing new. In fact, it's been around for centuries. What is considered the first book ban in the US took place in 1637. But even much earlier, there are records from 259 to 210 BC. The Chinese emperor Shi Huangti is said to have buried alive 460 Confucian scholars to control the writing of history in his time. In 212 BC, he burned all the books in his kingdom, retaining only a single copy of each for the royal library, and those were then destroyed before his death. With all previous historical records destroyed, he thought history could be said to begin with him. I mean, we're talking centuries and centuries of this phenomenon. Can we talk a little bit about this phenomenon, particularly with regards to women writers and their stories?
Yeah. I mean, look, people in power have often historically tried to control the flow of information, and they've tried to deny oppressed people access to information, which is why we see in American history enslaved people, it was illegal to teach enslaved people to read. Women have been, in various different ways, a second tier in this country, subjugated. And the way that women, that feminism has worked historically has been to spread information, for women to talk to each other, for women to exchange ideas, for them to talk about their bodies, write about their bodies when you think of our bodies ourselves. So I think this idea of censorship is very relevant to women. I think that, for a person to be fully autonomous and fully embodied. They have to understand what's going on in their bodies and their minds. And writing, reading, printing, these are all ways to get information out there to as many people as possible, which is why I think it's threatening.
Yeah, yeah. It just again reminds me of what I said initially. Our stories are so, so impactful. And any which way we can share our stories with each other and the world around us is so imperative, particularly if there are these forces, if you will, movements to ban our voices one way or another. So yeah, figuring out the best way that you can share, that any of us can share our storylines with each other, whether it's just one on one or with a community or a larger world, is so, so important. Yeah. And so many guests on GynoCurious have talked about ways in which their voice has been either suppressed or quieted or silenced. And listen, a lot of us grew up with the notion that we had to be good girls, that we had to be quiet, seen but not heard. And there's a bit of that coming back. And I'm here to speak out loud against that point of view. And I'm so again happy that your books are pointing that out as well. So on Gyno Curious, I also like to explore all the ways in which we can be healthier and create new narratives around illness and the pursuit of wellness. I know that recently you've had your own journey with illness. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah. So I am a breast cancer survivor. I was diagnosed in August of 2022. So while I was writing the first draft of this book, not great timing. To my shock, I was told that not only did I have breast cancer, but I needed chemotherapy, I needed radiation, I needed hormonal therapy. Pretty much everything that they could throw at me, they were going to try because I was young. I was 41 when I was diagnosed. And so I did it. I when a doctor tells you you need all of these awful treatments, it's really scary and it's really hard, but what's your choice, right? So you do it. My son is 9. My family went through it as a unit, and I do think that we are stronger for it. I do think I've gained a lot of really interesting and treasured perspective from the experience, but I'd like to never go through it again, right?
Right on, right on. I've actually never shared this on Kind of Curious. So I'm going to share it with you and those listening. So I had ovarian cancer in 2010, and I was very quiet about it. I was very private because I was a doctor in a community, a small community, and just felt like I could never share it. And this is the first time I'm saying it out loud. So thank you for sharing your story. I just feel compelled to commiserate with you. It's a provocative, profound, poignant experience, particularly to go through it when we're younger. But I think it's hard no matter when. It's just different because we have certain expectations of our body when we're younger. Everything from, oh my God, my hair, or oh my gosh, my vagina, or oh my God, how is sex going to feel? All these things that there's a loss around, and we kind of anticipate that when we get older those things will happen, but not when we're 40 or 50 or maybe even 60. And what we certainly know is that more and more people, but particularly women, are having cancers at an early age. And it rocks our boats. It rocks our boats. And, I've heard people use the word, and there's gifts to the experience. I don't like that word, quite frankly. I like other kind of gifts. But you're right. It changes the narratives of our lives. It brings into focus, or at least for me, it brought into focus what really matters. The amount of worry I spent on stuff that just became so irrelevant. Also, I'd love to hear kind of how your community responded, because it was fascinating to watch who kind of came close and who got distanced. Illness is a very interesting, for lack of a better word, storyline. And since we're
Mm.
talking about stories, I guess I wonder, one, did it change the way in which you see what you look forward to writing about or how you write? And two, did it change the storyline in your community around how you were seen and cared for? Those are very different questions. So I guess, like, what are your stories around it? What would you share with others?
Those are such good questions. And thank you for sharing about yourself. I didn't
Yeah.
expect that. That's amazing. And I feel connected to you over it now. It did change what I wanted to write. And because I was writing this book about Judy Blum when I was in treatment, I think it made me a little bolder about using my voice for what I believed in. I am very anti-censorship and I am very much against book banning. And I do try often to stay neutral as a journalist, but in this case, I kind of broke my own rules because I felt really passionate about it. And I think that I was a little bit emboldened by what I was going through. In terms of my community, I was really afraid of being seen as like the cancer mom. Like I'm in Brooklyn, so it seems like maybe I wouldn't be in a small town, but my son goes to the public school down the street. Our friends live within 4 or 5 blocks of each other. So, I knew I was going to lose my hair. And I also knew that I didn't want to ask my son to keep anything a secret. So, with those two things in mind, I was like, I think I'm just going to have to be out about this, not bring it up to anybody unprovoked, but that I'm not going to really hide it. So I wore my fabulous headscarves and I wore my wig and I wore my crazy hats. And I was really, I have to say, pleasantly surprised that very few people treated me differently or even treated it like, I don't want to say like it was a big deal, because of course it was a big deal, but they didn't treat me like it was something that they couldn't talk about. And very few people were like really, really caught off guard when I said it. It surprised me, like you said, there are so many young people affected by cancer now that so many people were like, oh my God, my best friend just went through this, or I have someone at work who's going through this right now. And, you know, I mean, it made me sad that it was so common, but also like we are developing kind of like a community vocabulary for dealing with these kind of illnesses in a way that I think we didn't have before, where it was like verboten to even say the word cancer. I think now it's like, well, with so many people affected by it, it's something that, again, we need to talk about. We need to share our stories and just, I think, make people feel like it's not the end. Like it can be a really terrible speed bump, but it could be a bump.
It's remarkable. We integrate traumas and hardships in our lives kind of all the time. Nobody escapes it, right? And so what I feel about illness is it's the same thing. We are kind of on this continuous spectrum of health, wellness, illness, not feeling good. And if you talk to anybody who's honest about, one day you don't feel so good, next day you feel okay. It's not cancer necessarily, but we go, we shift. We move around in this body of ours in terms of how we feel. And the thing about going through cancer diagnosis or any serious diagnosis that demands a lot of intervention and medications, et cetera, is that it changes the range. It changes the way in which we experience some of those subtle aches and pains in our lives and the way we see, again, the way we see healing and health and wellness and illness. I don't know. I since my cancer, I'm much gentler around the way I just go in and out of viruses, the way I go in and out of not feeling great. And I'm 63 years of age. Trust me, things don't always feel good. And
Yeah.
I'm just gentler around it. I mean, trust me, there are days where I'm like, gosh damn it, why don't I feel better? I'm running, I'm eating well, blah, 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 blah. But on the most part, there's more of an acceptance around it. And I'm grateful for that because in the past, it was either I was healthy or I was not. That doesn't make any sense for most of us, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I mean, cancer is kind of an ongoing experience. Like it's in the rear view, but it's also, I take pills every day that, are directly because I treated for cancer. So, it's something that I'm still going through. But yeah, I think it does help you kind of like blur the boundaries a little bit between sick and healthy. It's like you're living in this body and you just kind of have to roll with it. It's ever changing.
There's a light and a shadow to that feeling of like, is particularly right after one's diagnosis, you feel like every ache and pain must be the cancer. It's incredible. And it's terrifying and it's haunting. It's not good. But I'm sure you've heard others say, with time, it definitely gets better. And it does. It's like any grief experience. The loss is just not as poignant. It comes back and sometimes in unexpected ways, but it's not quite as sharp. The edges are gentler. But one of the things, at least for me, is that I realized too, I lost a brother-in-law from a sudden heart attack. I
Mm.
had another friend who was killed in a motor vehicle accident. It's like, oh yeah, this life is really precious. I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm just going to take day by day. And again, all of us have these tendrils of trauma or tendrils of fear, but we also have tendrils of courage and bravery and resilience and beauty. And so I want to just remind everyone out there that none of us are immune to this stuff. Unfortunately, we just aren't. And cancer is very much a part of our world. And we are going to discover all the reasons why that might be true. We postulate why that might be true.
Yeah.
So I wish you continued healing and health. And I'd like to come to a close with GynoCurious talking about pleasure. For far too long, women weren't able to shout out loud about what gave them pleasure. So if you had to talk about something that gives you joy and gives you pleasure, one of the things, what would you say?
Swimming in the ocean is the first thing that comes to mind. I love the water. If I even see it on TV, I get like a visceral experience of like, my husband calls it, he's like, oh, you want to put your whole body in it, don't you? And I do. I want to put my whole body in it. So I love the ocean.
Great. Well, I hope you have a bathtub in your home.
I do. Thank you.
Gets you kind of close to that.
It's close. Yeah, it'll do.
Yeah. Rachelle, thank you so much for speaking with GynoCurious today. To speak to me, I'm grateful for your story, and I can't wait to delve into your books and your next one. So thank you for sharing it with the world.
It's so nice speaking to you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to Jen Hammoud and Maddie Rosenberg, my co-producers. And thank you to the Epicurean who so kindly hosts Radio Free Rhinecliff. We are so, so grateful. So until the next episode of GynoCurious, please stay well. Listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the greatest of teachers, not to be ignored.